Hi, Rich Hoffman here. So Jerome Powell's upset. There's an investigation into him. He looked at the camera the other day and said the Trump administration essentially is trying to intimidate me into policy, and the Fed is supposed to operate free and independent of all these mechanisms. And that's actually part of the problem. And he addressed really the core of the problem is that the Federal Reserve, even though there's some appointees that happened through, like Jerome Powell was appointed by Trump, and Trump quickly regretted it, would like to have a better person, like to have a do-over. So he'd like to see Jerome Powell leave that post for the Federal Reserve. This goes back to essential problems that the Federal Reserve had since the very beginning. And again, when we're talking about even tariff regulation, the money policy and its regulation of it by a free people never was addressed properly in the Constitution. In the creation of the Federal Reserve, even though people say, well, what do I care about the Federal Reserve unless I'm out there buying a new mortgage or dealing with something that has interest rates attached to it, like a new car. The problem is Federal Reserve has not been connected to governance of people. So you can't really elect the kind of monetary policy that you want. You can elect whether you want to have white lines on the sides of your roads or stoplights at corners, or you want to have roundabouts, or these kinds of policies in our government, but we're not supposed to regulate our money and how currency is involved. And that is something, a mechanism of international banking and banking interests in general, and how they're all connected into this whole globalism issue. And the Federal Reserve has not been good for the United States of America's monetary policy. And Trump is doing what he was elected to do, and that's shake up assumptions. The tariffs are a way to deal with some of that monetary policy framework that never got addressed by the Constitution correctly. It was regulated to Congress, but what had happened was lobbyists found that they could identify certain members of Congress, they could make them rich through insider trading and various other mechanisms. Lots of mechanisms that nobody really wants to untangle, because then it really shows a level of corruption that is makes you question reality to begin with. And what has by default evolved over a period of time is that we could create a strong centralized executive branch that's elected every 4 years to come in and kind of fix things up, clean it up. If you don't like that current executive branch and how they handle things, then you can vote them out, and policy can then at least reflect somewhat of what the voters intend. And even though the purse strings of all these financial matters are supposed to go to Congress, we found that hasn't been very productive over time. And a lot of these moneyed interests have found ways to bypass the voters and enrich members of Congress in unhealthy ways. And then the monetary policy has been thrown into chaos, which then the Federal Reserve then can divvy out independent of any oversight. Congress has bought off, executive branches come and go, so all they have to do is wait out each administration because they're operating independent. They get appointed by a president, but then they often go do their own thing, and all these bank presidents for all these Fed banks live in their own little world. They go to the Tetons out in Jackson Hole and have their meeting, and they essentially become an extension of the World Economic Forum and are attached to global finance and centralized banks. And monetary policy then falls outside the realm of voters and their control over their government. And that's turned out to be a disaster. So when Jerome Powell sees that he's being pulled into the fray and he's being harassed by the Trump administration through bad spending on his part, oversight, he's under criminal investigation for the way they spent money, and he's calling it an intimidation tactic to get him to lower interest rates and alter monetary policy, and the power of government is actually coming after him, and he's supposed to be free and independent of that, which is the way the Federal Reserve was created, Jekyll Island, 1913. He's out of his mind, and he's wrong, and his assumptions were incorrect from the very beginning. And that's on him. And when he looks directly at the camera, because he doesn't normally do that, he's normally pretty good about addressing media. He can't be in a chairman role and not deal with the media. But he's functioning from an assumption that the Federal Reserve can remain independent of scrutiny, and it remains independent of government oversight. And that's a mechanism that centralized banking created to try and create an ethical standard that would eliminate impropriety, but actually pave the way for very much mechanisms behind the scenes that rig financial interests for only those who can pull the levers of power in their favor to do it in an unhealthy way that has worked very much against the United States. And I'm not talking about this stuff in a vacuum. There's a lot of books, a lot of good books, and I really love my books. But one of them that I really enjoyed, I really love Ron Chernows' books. This one, though, that House of Morgan, if you really want to understand finance and digging into how the House of Morgan Stanley was a financial player and created on the marketplace. This is a great place to start. You can really learn a lot about how money works and how finance evolved in the shadows of politics, with politics kind of created a facade. And then in the background, they give a lot of money to politicians, and the fiscal restraints are never reined in correctly. This is one of those really good books. Love. I mean, if we're trying to talk about and understand money and why the Federal Reserve might have been a noble idea when it was conceived, but turned out to be a disaster, that's a good book to pick to understand. I got a couple others down here that I think are really important. Here's another one. I really like this book on Jackson, Andrew Jackson. If it wasn't for him, we would have probably been controlled by central banking in the 1800s. And really one of the most prosperous times in American history was about 1870 to 1910. And that's when not having central banks in charge of the monetary policy flourished after the Civil War. And a lot of wealth was created in the United States that really we should be doing right now. But then the Jekyll Island thing happened in 1913. Federal Reserve started putting caps and manipulating things behind the scenes, started giving essentially guaranteed profits to those who loan money. And it became like mandatory insurance. And Andrew Jackson fought it, and America really rose with his resistance to that centralized banking trying to take over our government. Really, we flourished as long as we staved it off until the Jekyll Island experiment was unleashed and things got out of control, and that's where we're at today. And Jerome Powell, or whatever Fed chairman is put in place, we've tried it. We've tried to have an honest system, and the honest system has defied management by elected people in government. And the argument that they make, well, if you have people in charge of the monetary policy, that's an unstable environment for bankers and for finance people, and they need a stable environment to function in. And that stable environment, that was the promise, that was the hook. And I think a lot of these people, including the Morgan Stanley types, the House of Morgan, how they evolved over a long period of time. We listened to them. We tried to accommodate their interest, because there's a lot of respect that goes into wealth and wealth creation, and having people having access to get into it, old money versus new money. Here's another great book. This is one of my favorites. This is The First Tycoon, about Cornelius Vanderbilt. If you've ever been to the Biltmore Estate down in North Carolina, that's part of his legacy, and the kind of money that was created that we all marvel at and are fascinated by, and we wonder why we can't do that to this day. There's a lot of people that could have access to market and become the next Cornelius Vanderbilt. But what happened is you start getting this Federal Reserve policy, and people like Larry Fink are created because of federal policy. Larry Fink was a creation of the Federal Reserve because they bought up a bunch of bad loans from 2008 and sold them to people like Larry Fink with guaranteed returns that only they could get through control of the monetary policy. Here's another really good book This is another one by Ron Chernow. This is Grant, very popular book. If you go to a bookstore, you probably will find this one on the shelf. A lot of people read it. It takes a little while to read. It's full of great information. It's one of the best books on, I think, Civil War and post-Civil War period that there is. Really, if you want to understand Reconstruction, this is the book to have, to read and get and understand. Because then you really understand your country, the morality of the United States, why it's special and unique, and why it deserves to have a place in the world and shaping the world as it goes forward. And we offer a lot of people opportunities they wouldn't have any other way. And what people don't know about Grant as a president and the money policies that were in that thriving period that I talked about, the way banking interests were trying to manipulate things behind the scenes. And really what it comes down to is there are a lot of people that didn't like Grant because Grant was trying to be pro-Republican, pro-Republic, and carry on policies that stood up against the big bankers who wanted free reign over everything. And the continued policies, even though Jackson was a Democrat, we talked about him standing up against the banks. Grant understood westward expansion and the need for it, and create a flourishing capitalist environment in the Reconstruction period that made the United States the most powerful country in the world. And that kind of policy is exactly what we need to be getting back to, that same mentality. And Grant was great. It was great for civil rights. A lot of people who were ex-slaves thrived under the Grant administration, Republican administration, and we had westward expansion that really kind of pushed the rest of the world. All the countries that wanted to have a say in North America pushed them out, and we created an enterprise zone that is unlike anything the world's ever experienced. And that moneyed interest, because of the losses they had in globalism, as we had increases in communications and travel across the world, the world became much smaller. The policies that were created through capitalism in the United States were a threat to the rest of the world. And the way to rein that in was that Jekyll Island centralized bank policy to kind of say, well, if they're going to have a free country, it's going to operate the way it is, we got to get control of it through a central bank, create a stable market, so that all the socialists, communists, and Marxists, and all these global characters can roll into one world government. We can control that through interest rates and monetary policy. And we got to get control of the monetary policy of the United States. And we can buy off Congress. We can lure them with all kinds of temptations that the process of administrative state prevents any kind of reform from the voters. And they've been hiding that for well over a century now, and we haven't been able to get good control of it. But through elected government now and a strong executive branch that is high profile and covered on the news every day, where it's not so easy to hide these things. And then you have a character like Trump that's already wealthy. He doesn't get lured by the temptations of the kind of lobbyists that are throwing easy money into their pockets and free lunches and free vacation packages to all kinds of far-flung places. He can resist the temptations. So we can then get control of our monetary policy by having a strong executive branch that can be reined in every couple of years. And that fills the gap on the Constitution, on the what wasn't spelled out but was assumed in a polite society, that Congress could control the purse strings. So the moneyed interest got control of that, and now they've separated it with saying the Federal Reserve needs to be independent of government oversight, and that's how they've worked this rigged game in the background. But you have to read quite a lot to understand the game, how it works. This is a really good book, and some of these other ones I've brought up are ways to get there if you want to have context. But you definitely need to have context to understand the way the game has been rigged and understand why Jerome Powell does not have the right and ability to be independent of scrutiny given by a strong executive branch that is there to put the screws to him to get good fiscal policy, because we as American people are trying to get control of our monetary policy once again and wrestle away from these centralized bankers who are trying to insulate themselves from any kind of government oversight. And that's what's at the heart of the matter, and why it's great that Trump is intimidating him and pushing him, because that's what we elected him to go do. Because the alternative is that we have to get physical with these people who are in control of our fiscal policy, our monetary policy, and are rigging the game against our interests, because we have self-government. and they have to report to us, not the other way around. That's why it's crucial to rein in the Federal Reserve. That's why it's good to push Jerome Powell out. That's why it's good to have Department of Justice investigating him. That's why it's good to have a Trump out there beating on the drum. Independently wealthy, he can't be bought off by people, and we elected him for just this very thing, and that's to get control of all these matters that have been politely regulated in the background. But the rig game has been going on for a long time, well chronicled in all these wonderful books that you see. And there's we got to get control of it, and a strong executive branch is the best way to get there, because it gives you the quickest oversight through elections, free and honest elections, in order to maintain that control over that monetary policy. And that's the whole debate, and why it's good that Jerome Powell is now being investigated. And we need to push him off so we can get someone better there who knows how to control interest rates better and have a much more booming economy at a quicker rate that puts money in all of our pockets, because we are in control of our own government, not a bunch of pinheads and centralized bankers who are going to tell you you can put up stoplights, you can put up stop signs, you can decide what the age to have alcohol should be, but stay off the money, because that's our turf. And that's not how it works. And we're going to take it back. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.